I'll take the penthouse suite, top floor, cash offer. I smiled politely as I signed the purchase agreement for Parkview Tower, the prestigious downtown building where my soon-to-be ex-husband David and his secretary-turned-lover Jessica had just leased their dream office for their new law practice. The real estate agent's eyes widened at my decisive tone. Little did they know that in less than 72 hours, I would be revealed as the new owner of not just their office building, but the luxury apartment complex where they'd secretly signed a lease together. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how I rebuilt my life while becoming the unexpected landlord to the two people who thought they had taken everything from me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 7 years ago, I met David Mitchell at a charity fundraiser for the Westlake Historical Society. I was there representing my family's modest foundation, the small but respectable Walker Family Trust my grandmother had established before her passing. At that time, I was simply Sarah Walker, recent business school graduate and cautious inheritor of my grandmother's small real estate portfolio. 3 commercial properties in what was then the unfashionable part of downtown Westlake. "You work in real estate?" David had asked after introductions, his tone suggesting mild amusement. "Let me guess, residential sales? Helping young families find starter homes?" "Commercial property investment and management, actually," I'd corrected him, already noting his tendency to make assumptions. "Interesting hobby," he replied, clearly not taking it seriously. "I'm an attorney with Keller Associates. We represent some of the largest developers in the region." In those early days, I'd found his confidence appealing. David moved through Westlake's social circles with an assurance I envied, having grown up with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to put me through college. His polished appearance and easy charm opened doors in the city's elite circles. Doors I had been trying to access for my fledgling business endeavors. When we married 6 months later, I'd already begun to adapt to his expectations, finding it easier to let him believe what he wanted about my business acumen than to constantly defend my capabilities. Why fight it? My business mentor, Rachel? Chen had asked when I confided in her about David's dismissive attitude. Let him underestimate you. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage in business. Following her advice, I created a separate professional identity. While David believed I was running a small community foundation, I was steadily building Walker Properties, operating under my maiden name with a small, fiercely loyal team who understood the need for discretion. The initial buildings my grandmother left me became the seed capital for a strategic acquisition plan. I focused on undervalued properties in Riverside Commercial Center, an area city planners had earmarked for future development. What David dismissed as my charity work with the Downtown Revitalization Committee gave me insider knowledge about zoning changes and infrastructure improvements years before they became public. By our 3rd anniversary, my portfolio had tripled. By our 5th, Walker Properties owned 12 commercial properties and had minority stakes in 2 development projects, all while David believed I was keeping busy with foundation work and homemaking. The Parkview Tower acquisition had been my masterpiece, the culmination of 3 years of careful planning. When the opportunity arose to purchase the building housing David's law firm, I couldn't resist the poetic symmetry. Here was tangible proof of what I'd built while being systematically underestimated. I still remember signing the final paperwork, using the Mont Blanc pen I'd gifted myself after closing my first major deal. The primary tenant is Keller Associates Law, the property manager Brian Foster had noted. Any connection? Just make sure they receive the standard communications. Through the management company, I'd replied. No special treatment. For 2 years, I'd maintained the separation between Parkview Tower's ownership and my marriage. David had never once suspected, even when complaining about building management issues over dinner. I'd listen sympathetically. As he grumbled about lease terms or maintenance requests, offering the supportive responses he expected from a wife while making mental notes to address valid concerns through proper channels. The deception had never been about revenge or power games. It was simply easier to operate in a world where I wasn't constantly fighting against David's preconceptions. But somewhere along the way, the distance between my public and private identities had begun to wear on me. The constant code switching, businesswoman by day, supportive wife by evening, had started to feel less like a strategic choice and more like an erasure of my authentic self. Then came the day everything changed. I returned home early from a property closing to find David's car in the driveway at an unusual hour. Thinking he might be sick, I entered quietly, only to hear his voice and a woman's laughter from our bedroom upstairs. I stood frozen in the hallway as their conversation drifted down. "When are you going to tell her?" Jessica's voice, his secretary of 2 years. "After the Donovan contract is signed next week." David's reply was casual, unbothered. "The timing needs to be right. Sarah's not exactly business savvy. I need to make sure she doesn't try to claim any stake in the firm during the divorce." "She's going to be blindsided," Jessica said, a note of concern in her voice. "Sarah will be fine," David dismissed. "She has her little foundation work to keep her busy. Besides, the prenup protects everything important. She'll get the house and a settlement. More than generous, considering she's basically been a housewife playing at charity work." I slipped out as quietly as I'd entered, my world simultaneously crumbling and crystallizing into perfect clarity. That night, I stayed at Rachel's house, and by morning, I had made my decision. If David wanted to dismiss me as basically a housewife, he would learn exactly what this housewife was capable of. The next week unfolded with meticulous precision. While David worked late finalizing the Donovan contract, his excuse for not coming home, I contacted my attorney James Sullivan to begin divorce proceedings on my terms. More critically, I learned through my industry contacts that David and Jessica were planning to leave Keller Associates to start their own practice. They had already leased the penthouse suite at Parkview Tower, my building, and signed a lease for a luxury apartment at Riverside Residences, another property. In my portfolio, the irony was almost too perfect. "Are you going to evict them?" Rachel asked when I told her, over drinks at her downtown condo. "No," I replied, swirling the wine in my glass. "I'm going to wait until they're settled, until they feel secure in their new life together. Then I'm going to introduce myself as their landlord." Rachel's eyes widened slightly. "That's cold, Sarah. I love it." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. David finally asked for a divorce exactly when my sources predicted, the day after signing the Donovan contract. We sat in our kitchen, the granite island between us like a negotiation table. "I want to be fair about this, Sarah," he began, his tone suggesting he was doing me a favor. "You can keep the house, of course, and I've prepared a generous settlement offer." He slid a document across the counter. I didn't even glance at it. "Is it Jessica?" His momentary surprise was quickly replaced with practiced composure. "Yes. I'm sorry it happened this way, but these things develop. We've grown apart." "How long? Does it matter?" "Not really," I admitted. "Just curious how long you've been lying to me." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I never meant to hurt you. And yet," I smiled thinly. "Your timing is interesting right after the Donovan contract." His eyes narrowed slightly. "How did you know about that?" "I hear things," I said vaguely. "I also hear congratulations are in order. New firm, new office at Parkview Tower, new apartment at Riverside Residences. You've been busy." David's face registered genuine shock. "How could you possibly—" "Westlake's a small city for those who pay attention," I cut him off. "I'll have my attorney contact yours. I won't be accepting this settlement offer." His expression hardened. "The prenup is quite clear, Sarah. You're not entitled to any part of my practice or career earnings." I'm well aware of what the prenup, says David, and I have no interest in your practice or earnings. Then what do you want? I stood, gathering my keys. You'll find out soon enough. The next 3 weeks were a carefully orchestrated ballet of legal maneuvers and business preparations. While David moved out and publicly began his new life with Jessica, I finalized the restructuring of Walker Properties. After years of operating, through management companies and holding firms, it was time to establish a public identity. The announcement was scheduled for the same day David and Jessica were moving into their new office space. The press release was simple, but impactful. Walker Properties reveals ownership of Parkview Tower and Riverside Residences. CEO Sarah Walker announces community investment initiative. The timing couldn't be better, Michael Donovan noted during our final preparation meeting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Westlake's most prominent commercial developer, his recent partnership with Walker Properties had been a major coup and completely unknown to David. Will he suspect the announcement is deliberate? Emma Wilson, my assistant, asked as we reviewed the final details. Probably, I admitted. But it doesn't matter. This isn't about revenge. It's about finally stepping into my own light. The morning of the announcement, I dressed with particular care. A tailored navy suit I'd never worn at home, pearls that had belonged to my grandmother, and the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the press release went out. By 9:05, my phone was buzzing with a text from David. This has to be some kind of joke. Walker Properties? You? Call me immediately. I set my phone aside, focusing instead on the schedule of interviews and meetings that would establish Walker Properties as a significant player in Westlake's commercial real estate market. By the time I checked my messages again at noon, David had called 7 times and left increasingly agitated voicemails. Sarah, this is ridiculous. Call me back. How long have you been planning this little stunt? You can't possibly own Parkview Tower. That's absurd. Sarah, so help me if this is some kind of revenge play. The final message, left just 20 minutes earlier, was different. His voice had lost its edge of angry disbelief, replaced with something I'd rarely heard from David: uncertainty. I'm coming to your office. The receptionist at Parkview Management gave me the address. We need to talk. I warned Emma he might be arriving and asked her to show him in when he did. There was something fitting about forcing David to come to my space, rather than me rushing to respond to his demands as I had so many times during our marriage. At 2:17 p.m., Emma's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Mitchell is here to see you. Shall I send him in? Please give me 2 minutes, then show him in, I replied, using the time to center myself. When the door opened, I was standing by the window, looking out at the Westlake skyline, a view that included Parkview Tower in the distance. I turned slowly, taking in David's appearance. His normally impeccable suit was slightly rumpled, his expression a mix of confusion and something approaching respect. Hello, David, I said calmly. What is this? He asked, gesturing to the office around us with its sleek furnishings and the Walker Properties logo prominently displayed. Some elaborate scheme you cooked up when you found out about Jessica? I've owned Walker Properties for 7 years, David, since before we were married. He scoffed, though with less conviction than I expected. That's impossible. You run a small foundation. You organize charity events. That's what you decided I did, I corrected him. You never actually asked. You're telling me you've secretly been running a commercial real estate company our entire marriage, and now you just happen to own the building where my new firm is located? Do you honestly expect me to believe this isn't about revenge? I moved to my desk, retrieving a folder containing copies of property deeds, acquisition records, and news clippings documenting Walker Properties' growth over the years. I handed it to him silently. As David flipped through the evidence of my business success, his expression shifted from disbelief to dawning comprehension. "This can't be real," he muttered, but I could see he was beginning to believe it. "The Downtown Revitalization Committee," he said suddenly, looking up. "That wasn't just charity work? It was market research and relationship building? Every time I mentioned property values or zoning changes, you tuned out, David. You decided what I was capable of, and anything that didn't fit that narrative, you simply didn't hear." He continued examining the documents, stopping at a newspaper. Clipping dated 3 years earlier. "Walker Properties acquires historic Madison building," the headline read, accompanied by a small photo showing me at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "I remember this," he said slowly. "You had it on the coffee table. I thought it was something for your foundation." "You assumed it was for the foundation," I corrected. "Just like you assumed I was basically a housewife playing at charity work." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "You heard that conversation with Jessica." I did. "So this is about revenge." I sighed, sitting down behind my desk. "This is about finally living authentically, David. For years, I let you define me because it was easier than fighting your perception. I built this company while being systematically underestimated, not just by you, but by a world that often doesn't take women in business seriously. The fact that I own your building and apartment complex, that's just ironic timing." "Convenient irony," he muttered, but the fight was leaving his voice. "The lease terms for both properties will remain exactly as agreed," I continued, keeping my voice professional. "Walker Properties maintains strict separation between personal relationships and business operations. You and Jessica will receive the same treatment as any other tenant. No better, no worse." David stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "You're serious?" "Entirely. Why keep it secret all these years? Why not just tell me?" It was the question I'd been waiting for, the one that cut to the heart of our failed marriage. "I tried, David. For the first 2 years, I mentioned my acquisitions, my business strategy, my growth plans. Every time you changed the subject, looked bored, or patted my hand and said, 'That's nice, dear.' Eventually, it was simply easier to let you believe what you wanted." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I didn't realize?" "You didn't want to realize," I interrupted gently. "You were comfortable with a version of me that was less than you, less ambitious, less successful, less capable. It fit your worldview." David was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. I could almost see him reviewing our marriage. Through this new lens, reinterpreting countless conversations and interactions. "All those nights you stayed up working on foundation reports," he said slowly. "Quarterly financial statements, acquisition proposals, development plans," I confirmed. "Your committee meetings every Tuesday morning at 7? My executive team. We have a standing strategy session." David's expression shifted from confusion to something more complex, a mixture of disbelief, respect, and wounded pride. "Does this change anything?" he finally asked. "About the divorce?" I considered the question carefully. "The divorce will proceed as planned. I have no interest in your practice or earnings, as I said before. The prenup you were so concerned about protects my assets as well, which, as you now know, are considerable. Walker Properties will remain separate, as it always has been." "And us?" he pressed. "There is no us anymore, David. You made that decision when you chose Jessica." "I'm just finally choosing myself." My phone buzzed with a message from Emma, reminding me of my next appointment. David recognized the dismissal for what it was and stood to leave, pausing at the door. "For what it's worth," he said, "I underestimated you. Completely." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You did." After he left, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not vindication, as this had never been about revenge, but the simple pleasure of finally being recognized for my capabilities and achievements. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of media attention, business meetings, and legal proceedings. The revelation of Walker Properties' ownership structure became a minor sensation in Westlake's business community, with profiles in local business publications highlighting my journey from small-scale investor to significant market force. The divorce was finalized with surprising efficiency, David having lost his appetite for contesting anything once he understood the full scope of what I had built. As promised, I made no claim on his practice, and he made no claim on Walker Properties. 3 months after the announcement, I hosted a reception at Parkview Tower for all tenants, introducing myself properly as the building's owner and outlining plans for improvements and community initiatives. David and Jessica attended, keeping a respectful distance, but making a point to speak with me briefly before leaving. "Congratulations on the Donovan partnership," David said, referring to the major development project that had been announced the previous week. "It's impressive." "Thank you," I replied, noting the genuine respect in his tone, something I'd rarely heard during our marriage. Jessica, looking uncomfortable but determined, added, "The new sustainability upgrades to the building are amazing. The green roof garden is beautiful." I thanked her as well, keeping our interaction professionally cordial. As they left, I noticed David glance back, his expression unreadable. Whatever regrets he might be harboring were his to manage, just as my future was now entirely mine to shape. That evening, as the reception wound down, Rachel joined me on the rooftop garden, champagne glasses in hand. "To Sarah Walker, finally visible in her full glory," she toasted, clinking her glass against mine. I smiled, looking out over the Westlake skyline. My skyline in many ways, with Walker Properties holdings now prominently featuring in the city's commercial landscape. "Was it worth it?" Rachel asked after a moment. "The years of hiding your success?" I considered the question carefully. "It was necessary then," I replied. "But I wouldn't do it again. Living divided against yourself exacts too high a price." "And seeing David's face when he realized who his landlord was?" Rachel pressed, a mischievous glint in her eye. "That must have been satisfying." I laughed softly. I won't deny there was a certain poetry to it. But the real victory wasn't becoming his landlord. It was finally becoming fully myself. As we stood overlooking the city, I felt a sense of alignment I hadn't experienced in years. The compartmentalization that had defined my existence was dissolving, allowing me to bring my full self to every aspect of my life. The irony of becoming my ex-husband's landlord made for a satisfying narrative twist. But the true story was much simpler and more profound. A woman who had finally stopped making herself smaller to accommodate someone else's comfort. The day my husband left me for his secretary, he thought he was writing the end of my story. Instead, he merely set the stage for me to begin a new chapter. One where I was no longer content to be underestimated, no longer willing to hide my light, and no longer defined by anyone's expectations but my own. That night, as David slept soundly beside me, convinced of his professional triumph with the Donovan contract, I lay awake thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment of decision. 7 years earlier, I'd met David Mitchell at a charity auction benefiting Westlake's Historical Society. I was there representing my family's foundation, the modest but respectable trust my grandmother had established before her death. Back then, I was still Sarah Walker, recent MBA graduate and cautious inheritor of my grandmother's small real estate portfolio. 3 commercial properties in what was then the unfashionable part of downtown Westlake. "You work in real estate?" David had asked after introductions, his tone suggesting mild amusement. "Let me guess. Residential sales helping young couples find their dream homes?" "Commercial property management and investment, actually." I'd corrected him, already, noting his tendency to make assumptions. "Interesting hobby," he'd replied, clearly not taking it seriously. I'm an attorney with Keller Associates. We represent some of the largest property developers in the region. In those early days, I'd found his confidence appealing. David moved through the world with an assurance I envied, having grown up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put me through college. When we married 6 months later, I'd already begun to adapt to his expectations, finding it easier to let him believe what he wanted about my business acumen than to constantly defend my capabilities. Why fight it? My business mentor, Rachel, Chen had asked when I confided in her about David's dismissive attitude. Let him underestimate you. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage in business. Following her advice, I'd created a separate professional identity. While David believed I was running a small community foundation, I was steadily building Walker Properties, operating under my maiden name with a small, fiercely loyal team who understood the need for discretion. The initial buildings my grandmother left me became the seed capital for a strategic acquisition plan. I focused on undervalued properties in the areas Westlake's city planners had earmarked for future development. What David dismissed as my charity work with the Downtown Revitalization Committee gave me insider knowledge about zoning changes and infrastructure improvements years before they became public. By our 3rd anniversary, my portfolio had tripled. By our 5th, Walker Properties owned 12 commercial properties and had minority stakes in 2 development projects, all while David believed I was keeping busy with foundation work and homemaking. The Parkview Tower acquisition had been my masterpiece, the culmination of 3 years of careful planning. When the opportunity arose to purchase the building housing David's law firm, I couldn't resist the poetic symmetry. Here was tangible proof of what I'd built while being systematically underestimated. I still remembered signing the final paperwork, using the Mont Blanc pen I'd gifted myself after closing my first major deal. The property manager, Brian Foster, had looked at me curiously. The primary tenant is Keller Associates Law, he noted. Any connection? Just make sure they receive the standard communications through the management company, I'd replied. No special treatment. For 2 years, I'd maintained the separation between Parkview Tower's ownership and my marriage. David had never once suspected, even when complaining about building management issues over dinner. I'd listen sympathetically as he grumbled about lease terms or maintenance requests, offering the supportive responses he expected from a wife while making mental notes to address valid concerns through proper channels. The deception had never been about revenge or power games. It was simply easier to operate in a world where I wasn't constantly fighting against David's preconceptions. But somewhere along the way, the distance between my public and private identities had begun to wear on me. The constant code switching, businesswoman by day, supportive wife by evening, had started to feel less like a strategic choice and more like an erosion of my authentic self. I turned in bed, watching David's peaceful sleeping face in the moonlight filtering through our bedroom curtains. After all our years together, he still didn't truly know me. The question that had been growing in my mind for months now demanded an answer. Was a marriage built on such profound misconception worth preserving? My phone vibrated softly on the nightstand. A text from Michael Donovan confirmed our 9 a.m. meeting about the property development partnership we'd been quietly planning for months. I typed back a simple, "Looking forward to it," then set the phone down, my decision crystallizing. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of my life's next chapter. The alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m. I slipped out of bed while David continued sleeping, his late night of celebratory scotch ensuring he wouldn't stir for hours yet. By 6:15, I was dressed in my power suit, a tailored charcoal ensemble I kept in the guest room closet, one David had never seen me wear. I applied my makeup with careful precision, transforming from Sarah Mitchell, supportive wife, to Sarah Walker, CEO of Walker Properties. The early morning light cast long shadows across our kitchen as I prepared coffee, leaving enough in the pot for David when he eventually woke. Out of habit, I almost wrote a note explaining my absence: a foundation meeting, a charity committee, the usual excuses. But I stopped myself mid-sentence. After today, the excuses would no longer be necessary. I drove downtown as the city was just beginning to wake. The streets quiet, most of the business district still dark except for security lighting. Parkview Tower, however, rose against the dawn sky like a beacon, its glass exterior catching the first rays of sunlight. I pulled into the private underground garage using the keycard that David didn't know I possessed, and parked in the spot marked Owner Reserved. The executive elevator required a special access code, bypassing the lobby and security desk where I might be recognized as Mrs. Mitchell from the law firm. Instead, it deposited me directly on the 24th floor, one level below where David's firm began their suite of offices. "Good morning, Ms. Walker." My assistant Emma greeted me as I entered the Walker Properties executive suite. Few people knew that while David and his colleagues worked on floors 25 through 27, I operated my business just one floor below them. "Everything is prepared for this morning's announcement," Emma continued. "The press release will go out at exactly 9 a.m. I nodded, taking the folder she handed me. "And the new lease terms for Keller Associates?" "Prepared as requested," Emma replied. "No increase in rent, but the updated terms require them to participate in the building's sustainability initiatives and community engagement programs. We've also included the right of first refusal on the additional floor space they've been wanting." These were fair terms. Better than fair, actually. Despite David's behavior, I had no desire to punish his firm or jeopardize the livelihoods of the hundreds of people who worked there. This revelation wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. "The Donovan team will be here at 8:30, Emma continued. "They're very interested in discussing partnership opportunities now that our ownership structure will be public." This was the business benefit of my decision. The opportunity to operate openly would allow Walker Properties to expand our partnerships and raise capital for larger projects. Keeping my identity secret had served its purpose during the building phase, but had become a limitation as we grew. "Ms. Walker," Emma hesitated, her professional demeanor slipping slightly. "If you don't mind my asking, how do you think your husband will react when he finds out?" I moved to the wall of windows that offered a panoramic view of the awakening city, the same city where I'd quietly built my empire while being dismissed as a charity fundraiser playing at business. "David sees what he expects to see," I replied, "and he's never expected to see me as a business equal." As the morning progressed, I reviewed the press materials with my PR team, confirmed details with legal, and prepared for the cascade of inquiries that would follow the announcement. At 8:30, Michael Donovan arrived with his investment team, eager to discuss the commercial development partnership we'd been quietly planning for months. "The timing couldn't be better," Michael noted, as we reviewed the proposal. "With downtown property values rising, your portfolio positioning is exactly what our investors have been looking for." "And your husband still has no idea?" Michael asked, unable to hide his curiosity. "He's about to find out," I replied, glancing at my watch. It was 8:55 a.m. In 5 minutes, the press release would hit the business wires. Walker Properties reveals ownership of prestigious Parkview Tower and 6 additional downtown properties. CEO Sarah Walker announces innovative community business partnership initiative. Simultaneously, a formal notice would be delivered to all Parkview Tower tenants, including Keller Associates, introducing them to the building's owner and inviting them to a reception that evening to discuss the new community-focused vision for the property. At precisely 9 a.m., Emma knocked on the conference room door. "It's done," she said simply. "The press release has gone out." As if on cue, my phone began to buzz with incoming messages. I excused myself from the Donovan team and stepped into my office to check them. 3 were from my executive team confirming media inquiries. 2 were from other building tenants expressing surprise and congratulations. And 1 was from David. "What the hell is going on? There's a press release. saying Parkview Tower is owned by Walker Properties with you as CEO. This has to be a mistake. Call me now. I set my phone down on the desk, taking a moment to steady my breathing. 7 years of leading a double life were about to end. 7 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and defined by someone else's limited perception. Emma, I called to my assistant. Please let security know that Mr. Mitchell from Keller Associates may be coming down to our floor. When he arrives, show him directly to my office. The first tremors of the earthquake I'd just triggered were beginning to spread. Soon, David would face the reality that the woman he dismissed as a foundation director at last night's dinner was actually his landlord, a successful CEO, and the owner of a real estate portfolio worth over $50 million. I returned to the conference room where the Donovan team waited, forcing myself to focus on business, while my personal life teetered on the brink of transformation. The next hour passed in a blur of negotiations and strategic planning. Through it all, I maintained my professional composure, though my mind kept returning to David and the confrontation that was inevitably coming. At 10:15 a.m., Emma appeared at the door again. Her expression told me everything I needed to know. "Ms. Walker," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "Mr. Mitchell is here to see you. He seems quite insistent." I nodded, excusing myself from the meeting. As I walked toward my office, I caught a glimpse of David through the glass walls. He stood with his back to me, staring out at the view of the city. The same view visible from his office one floor above, yet somehow completely different from this perspective. 7 years of lies by omission were about to end. 7 years of just a foundation director were about to be redefined. As I reached for the door handle, I took a deep breath, preparing to finally introduce my husband to the woman I truly was. I paused at my office door, observing David through the glass. His normally impeccable appearance was disheveled, tie loosened, hair mussed from repeatedly running his hands through it. He hadn't even taken the time to properly knot his tie before rushing downtown. In 7 years of marriage, I'd rarely seen him looking so undone. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. "Hello, David." He spun around, his expression a volatile mix of confusion, anger, and disbelief. For a moment, he simply stared, as if seeing me for the first time. Taking in my tailored suit, the executive office with my name on the door, the wall of industry awards I'd never displayed at home. "What is this?" he finally managed, gesturing wildly around the room. "Some kind of joke? A prank?" "No joke," I replied calmly, closing the door behind me. "This is Walker Properties, my company." "Your company?" he repeated, the words as if they were in a foreign language. "Since when do you have a company? And what's this nonsense about you owning Parkview Tower, our firm's building?" I moved to my desk, gesturing for him to take a seat across from me. He remained standing, too agitated to sit. "Walker Properties has owned Parkview Tower for just over 2 years now," I explained, keeping my voice steady and professional. "Along with 6 other commercial properties in the downtown area. I've been building this company for 7 years, David, since before we were married." "That's impossible," he scoffed, though his certainty was clearly wavering as he took in the evidence surrounding him. "You run a small charity foundation. You plan dinner parties and fundraisers. You're a foundation director." "Yes," I finished for him, raising an eyebrow. "That's what you told everyone at dinner last night. What was the phrase? The perfect example of knowing how to support from behind the scenes?" David had the grace to look momentarily abashed, but quickly rallied. "This doesn't make any sense. If you've owned our building for 2 years, why keep it secret? Why the elaborate deception? Is this some kind of bizarre revenge scheme?" I sighed, realizing how difficult it would be for him to understand a perspective so far into his own. It wasn't about revenge, David. It was about practicality. From the day we met, you made assumptions about my capabilities and interests. You decided who I was and what I could do, and any attempt to correct those assumptions was met with dismissal or condescension. That's not true, he protested, but without conviction. Isn't it? Last night at dinner, I tried to speak about business 6 times. Each time, you interrupted me, spoke over me, or explained to everyone at the table why my opinion wasn't relevant. That was different. I was trying to impress clients. By belittling your wife? I asked quietly. Fine. Maybe I was dismissive, he conceded, running a hand through his hair again, his frustration evident. But that doesn't explain all this. He gestured around the office again. Why the secret identity? Why not just tell me you had a business? I moved to the credenza and opened a folder, withdrawing a stack of newspaper and magazine clippings. Each featured a photo of a commercial property and a small mention of its acquisition by Walker Properties. I tried to tell you, David. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I brought up my business interests regularly. Each time, you redirected the conversation, changed the subject, or simply tuned out. I handed him a framed article from the Business Journal dated 6 years earlier. The headline read, Walker Properties acquires historic Madison building. A small photo showed me shaking hands with the seller. I left this on the coffee table for a week, I told him. You used it as a coaster for your scotch. David stared at the article, recognition slowly dawning. I remember this. Wasn't this part of your charity project? The renovation of old downtown structures? That was the explanation you created, I replied. When I talked about acquiring the Madison building, you assumed it was for the Downtown Revitalization Committee, not as a commercial investment. You heard what you wanted to hear. So instead of correcting me, you just created a secret life? His tone was incredulous, but I could see the first hints of understanding beginning to penetrate. It wasn't a deliberate deception at first, I explained, returning to my desk. It was simply easier to let you believe what you wanted rather than constantly fighting for validation. But over time, as Walker Properties grew, maintaining the separation became more complex. And Parkview Tower, our building, was that deliberate? There was a harder edge to his voice now. The opportunity presented itself, I admitted. The previous owner was facing bankruptcy and needed to sell. Quickly. It was a sound business decision. David sank into the chair across from me, finally overwhelmed enough to sit. I don't understand. If you've been running all this, he gestured vaguely at the office, then what was all that charity work you were always doing? The downtown revitalization committee? The endless meetings and fundraisers? The committee is real, I explained. It's the philanthropic arm of Walker Properties. We dedicate a percentage of our profits to community improvement projects in the areas where we own property. It's good for the community and good for property values. A win-win strategy. He fell silent, processing this information. I could almost see him reconstructing our 7 years together, reinterpreting countless conversations and interactions through this new lens. All those nights you stayed up working on foundation reports, he said slowly. Quarterly financial statements. Acquisition proposals, development plans, I confirmed. The charity galas where you networked with community leaders. Business development meetings, relationship building with potential partners and investors. Your committee that meets every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. My executive. Team. We have a standing strategy meeting. David's expression shifted from confusion to something more complex, a mixture of disbelief, grudging respect, and wounded pride. Why reveal everything now? He asked after all this time. Why go public? It was a fair question, and one I'd carefully considered over the past months. 2 reasons, I replied honestly. First, Walker Properties has reached a point where operating through shell companies and management firms is limiting our growth potential. To move forward with our expansion plans, particularly the partnership with Donovan Development, we need to establish a public identity. David's head snapped up. Donovan Development? Is that why Michael Donovan was asking all those questions about our firm's future plans last night? I nodded. Michael and I have been discussing a joint venture for several months. While I sat there letting me pontificate about business to people who knew you were... He trailed off, the full humiliation of the previous evening finally dawning on him. That brings me to the second reason, I continued quietly. I'm tired of living a fragmented life, David. I'm tired of being one person in this office and someone entirely different at home. Last night at dinner, listening to you describe me as just a foundation director, while Michael and others, people who know and respect my business acumen, sat there uncomfortably. It crystallized something I've been feeling for a long time. And what's that? He asked, his voice barely audible. That a marriage shouldn't require one person to make themselves smaller to accommodate the other's ego. The words hung between us, their truth undeniable. David flinched slightly, but didn't argue. My phone buzzed with an incoming message. Emma was checking if I needed security. David's arrival had caused quite a stir in the office. I quickly replied that everything was under control. So what happens now? David finally asked, looking around the office as if seeing me for the first time. With the building? With our marriage? With everything? The building is simple, I replied. Keller Associates will receive the same new lease terms as all other tenants. Fair market rates with incentives for community engagement. Nothing changes operationally. And us? His voice was uncharacteristically vulnerable. I hadn't expected this question so soon, hadn't fully formulated my answer. For 7 years, our marriage had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding, not just about what I did, but about who I was. Could such a foundation be rebuilt? That depends, I said honestly. On whether you can see me, really see me, as I am. Not as a foundation director, not as an extension of yourself, but as a full person with ambitions and capabilities that might equal or even exceed your own. David's phone began ringing insistently. He glanced at it, then silenced it without answering. The office is probably in chaos, he said. The managing partners must have seen the press release by now. They'll have questions. I acknowledged this with a nod, as will the other tenants, the press, and everyone else. That's why we're hosting a reception this evening, to introduce myself properly and outline our vision going forward. Our vision? He repeated, a hint of bitterness in his tone. You've had this all planned out, haven't you? Down to the, last detail. Not everything, I countered. I didn't plan how you would react. I didn't know if you'd be angry, impressed, or simply walk away. And which would you prefer? He asked, meeting my gaze directly for the first time since entering my office. The question caught me off guard. In all my planning, I'd focused on the logistics of the revelation, not its aftermath. What did I want from David? Validation? Apology? Or simply acceptance of who I truly was? I'd prefer honesty, I said finally. Real recognition, not performed admiration. I don't need you to be impressed, David. I just need you to see me. He nodded slowly, then stood. I need time to process this. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage. It's all different now. I understand, I replied, also rising. Take whatever time you need. David moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. The downtown revitalization reception next week, the one you've been planning for months. Is that the official launch of your partnership with Donovan Development? And the unveiling of your community development plan for the Madison district? Yes. He shook his head, a wry smile briefly crossing his face. You invited all my colleagues. You even had me help with the guest list. Everyone who matters in commercial real estate and property law will be there. It's an important milestone for Walker Properties, I confirmed. And all this time I thought I was helping with a charity event. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been so blind. As David left, I remained standing by my desk, experiencing a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. For 7 years, I'd maintained a careful separation between my professional identity and my marriage. Now, those worlds had collided, and the aftermath was impossible to predict. My phone buzzed again, Emma reminding me that the Donovan team was still waiting to continue our meeting. Beyond them, a day full of press inquiries, tenant questions, and strategic planning stretched ahead. The revelation of Walker Properties' ownership structure was just the beginning of a new chapter for the company. As for my marriage, that future was far less certain. David now faced the challenge of reconciling the wife he thought he knew with the business leader who had been operating just one floor below his law firm all this time. Whether our relationship could survive such a fundamental reassessment remained to be seen. I gathered my materials and prepared to return to the conference room, compartmentalizing my personal concerns to focus on business, just as I'd done for years. The difference was that now, finally, I could do so as my complete self, not just a foundation director, but Sarah Walker Mitchell in full. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of meetings, press inquiries, and congratulatory calls. By mid-afternoon, the story had been picked up by every major business publication in the city. The headlines varied but carried the same essential message. Secret real estate mogul reveals identity. Walker Properties CEO unveils 50 inheritor portfolio. And my personal favorite from the Business Chronicle. The foundation director was a tycoon all along. I'd anticipated media interest, but the personal angle, the fact that I'd built this empire while my husband, a prominent attorney, remained oblivious, had catapulted the story beyond business news into human interest territory. My phone had been ringing constantly with requests for interviews, profiles, and television appearances. The Wall Street Journal wants to do a feature, Emma informed me, handing over yet another message slip. And 3 women's business magazines have called about cover stories. I nodded, adding it to the growing pile on my desk. My PR team was carefully vetting all requests, prioritizing those that would highlight Walker Properties' business strategy rather than sensationalizing my personal life. Still, I knew the dual narrative was impossible to avoid completely. At 4:30 p.m., I finally had a moment alone in my office. The Donovan team had departed with a signed letter of intent for our partnership. Legal had reviewed all tenant communications. Regarding the ownership revelation, and preparations for the evening's reception were well underway in the building's atrium. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, swiveling my chair to face the windows. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the city skyline. My city. The landscape I'd been quietly reshaping for years while being dismissed as inconsequential. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Will you be home tonight or staying at the reception?" The message carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Would I be coming home to our shared space, or had today's revelation irreversibly altered that arrangement too? I hadn't decided yet. "Reception ends at 9. Not sure after that." "Need time to think," I replied honestly. 3 dots appeared as he typed, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally. I understand. For what it's worth, I've been doing a lot of thinking too. Before I could respond, Emma knocked on my door. "Ms. Walker, the setup team needs you in the atrium to approve the final arrangements, and your stylist is here with options for this evening." I nodded, setting my phone aside. The personal reckoning with David would have to wait. Right now, Walker Properties needed its CEO. The building's soaring atrium had been transformed for the evening's reception. Elegant lighting highlighted the architectural features, while strategic floral arrangements created intimate conversation areas throughout the vast space. A small stage had been set up at one end where I would make brief remarks later in the evening. "Everything looks perfect," I told the event coordinator, surveying the space. "We've confirmed 87 attendees so far," she reported, including representatives from all major tenants, local business leaders, and several city officials. "And Keller Associates?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. 5 partners confirmed, including the managing partner, Mr. Keller. No response from Mr. Mitchell. I nodded, unsurprised. David was still processing the morning's revelation, attending a reception celebrating the woman who had upended his understanding of his marriage might be more than he could manage right now. As I returned to my office, to prepare for the evening, Rachel Chen was waiting for me. My first business mentor and longtime confidant, Rachel had been one of the few people who knew about both sides of my life from the beginning. "Well," she said, rising to embrace me warmly, "the secret's finally out. How does it feel to be fully yourself for the first time in 7 years?" "Exhausting," I admitted with a small laugh, "but also liberating." "And David?" she asked, her expression softening with concern. "How did he take it?" I sank into the chair beside her, suddenly grateful for the presence of someone who understood the full complexity of my situation. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied. Shocked, confused, a bit angry. Mostly, I think his pride is wounded. Rachel nodded knowingly. Men like David build their identities around being the provider, the knower, the protector. Learning that his wife not only didn't need that protection, but was actually operating at a level that exceeded his own. That's a fundamental challenge to his self-concept. "I never meant to humiliate him," I said quietly. "That wasn't the point of any of this." "I know that," Rachel assured me. "The question is whether he can come to understand it too." We were interrupted by the arrival of my stylist with several outfit options for the evening's reception. Rachel excused herself, promising to return for the event, leaving me to transform once again, this time from CEO Sarah Walker to public figure Sarah Mitchell Walker, making her debut in both business and social circles as her complete self. The reception began at 6:30 p.m. Standing in the private elevator that would take me to the atrium, I felt a momentary flutter of nerves. For years, I'd operated in the shadows, building relationships one-on-one, letting my results speak for themselves. Tonight would be different, a public declaration of who I was and what I'd built. The doors opened, and I stepped into my new reality. "Ms. Walker," the building manager greeted me, using my professional name for the first time in a public setting. "Everyone is eager to meet you." The next 2 hours passed in a whirlwind of introductions, congratulations, and business discussions. I moved through the crowd, speaking with tenants who were just discovering that the woman they'd occasionally seen in the elevator was actually their landlord, networking with business leaders who were reassessing their understanding of the city's commercial real estate landscape, and reassuring investors that Walker Properties' public emergence would only strengthen our market position. Throughout it all, I kept finding myself scanning the room for David. Despite our complicated situation, some part of me had hoped he might appear, if not to support me, then at least to begin the process of reconciling the wife he thought he knew with the business leader now commanding the attention of the entire room. At 8:15 p.m., I was speaking with the city's economic development director when I saw a familiar figure enter the atrium. David stood just inside the entrance, surveying the scene with an unreadable expression. He'd changed from his earlier, disheveled appearance into an impeccably tailored suit, the one he reserved for court appearances and important client meetings. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. Then Michael Donovan approached him, saying something that drew his attention away. I watched as he introduced David to several other executives, pulling him into what appeared to be a serious business conversation. "Ms. Walker," the event coordinator touched my elbow gently. "We're ready for your remarks whenever you are." I nodded, directing my focus back to the task at hand. The personal drama with David would need to wait. Right now, I had a company to formally introduce to the world. Taking my place at the podium, I surveyed the gathered crowd. Business leaders who had dismissed me at countless social events now looked up with newfound respect. Building tenants who had dealt with my management company without ever knowing who owned their office space listened attentively. And at the back of the room, slightly apart from the others, stood David, my husband, who was seeing me truly for the first time. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling beneath the surface. "For many of you, this reception is an introduction. For others, it's a reintroduction under very different circumstances. I am Sarah Walker Mitchell, founder and CEO of Walker Properties." I paused, allowing the reality of that statement to settle over the room. 7 years ago, I began acquiring undervalued properties in this city's downtown core, starting with a small portfolio inherited from my grandmother. Today, Walker Properties owns 7 commercial buildings, including Parkview Tower, and has minority stakes in 4 development projects currently underway. Murmurs of approval rippled through the audience as I outlined the company's growth and our vision for the future, the partnership with Donovan Development, our community initiatives, and our commitment to revitalizing the downtown area through sustainable, people-centered design. Some of you may be wondering why I chose to operate in relative anonymity until now, I continued, addressing the question everyone had been too polite to ask directly. The answer is simple. I wanted our properties and our business practices to speak for themselves, without preconceptions or assumptions influencing how our work was perceived. My gaze found David's across the room. He was watching me intently, his expression still unreadable. But there comes a point when remaining in the shadows limits what you can accomplish. Walker Properties has reached that inflection point. To fully realize our vision for this city's future, we need to step into the light, build transparent partnerships, and engage openly with the community we serve. As I concluded my remarks and opened the floor for questions, I noticed David slipping out a side door. My heart sank slightly, though I maintained my professional composure through the Q&A session that followed. By 9:30 p.m., the reception was winding down. I'd spoken personally with nearly every attendee, answered countless questions about Walker Properties' future plans, and scheduled follow-up meetings with several potential partners. By any business measure, the evening had been an unqualified success. And yet, as the last guest departed and the cleanup crew began breaking down the event, I felt a lingering sense of incompletion. The professional revelation had gone according to plan, but the personal reconciliation remained unresolved. "Congratulations," Rachel said, joining me as I gathered my things. "You've officially arrived as a public figure in this city's business community." "Thank you," I replied, mustering a smile. "For everything. Your mentorship, your discretion all these years, your support today." Rachel studied me carefully. "You're thinking about David." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. He left without saying goodbye. "Give him time," she advised gently. "This is a lot for anyone to process, especially someone as prideful as your husband." I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. "I'm not sure where to go from here," I admitted. "Home feels complicated right now." "My guest house is always available," Rachel offered. "Or you could stay in a hotel tonight. Give yourself some space to think." After a moment's consideration, I made my decision. No, I need to go home. Avoiding David won't resolve anything. Rachel nodded approvingly. That's the Sarah I know, facing challenges head-on. As my car pulled out of the Parkview Tower garage, I felt the weight of the day's event settling over me. The professional triumph, the media attention, the successful reception. all overshadowed by the uncertain state of my marriage. The drive home took me through downtown, past buildings I owned and developments I'd helped shape. The city looked different tonight, as if the mere act of publicly claiming my role in its evolution had physically transformed the landscape. When I turned onto our street, I was surprised to see lights on throughout our house. David's car was in the driveway, along with another I didn't recognize. Pulling alongside them, I sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts before going inside. The front door opened before I reached it. David stood in the entryway, his expression still guarded but less shocked than it had been that morning. "You have a visitor," he said simply, stepping aside to reveal Michael Donovan sitting in our living room. "Michael?" I said, surprised. "I thought you'd left the reception hours ago." "I did," he replied, rising from the sofa. "But there was something important I needed to discuss with both you and David." I glanced between them, noting David's carefully neutral expression and Michael's unusually serious demeanor. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down my bag. "After you left the reception," Michael explained, "David approached me with some questions about our partnership plans for the Madison District project." I turned to David, confused. "You were asking about my business deals?" He nodded, hands in his pockets. "I realized I know absolutely nothing about what you actually do. If we're going to have any chance of moving forward from this, I need to understand." Something tight in my chest loosened slightly at his words. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a willingness to learn. It was more than I had dared to hope for just hours earlier. "So I invited Michael here," David continued, "to walk me through the Donovan partnership and to ask him a question I should have asked you years ago." "What question?" I asked softly. David's expression shifted, vulnerability momentarily breaking through his careful composure. "I asked him if you were any good at what you do." I held my breath, looking to Michael, who was watching me with unmistakable respect. "And I told him," Michael said, "that Sarah Walker isn't just good, she's brilliant. That she sees opportunities others miss, builds relationships others can't manage, and has created more value in 7 years than most developers achieve in a lifetime." The room fell silent as David absorbed this assessment, professional validation of my capabilities from a source he couldn't dismiss. "Thank you, Michael," I said finally, genuinely moved by his advocacy. "I should go," he replied, gathering his coat. "You two have a lot to discuss, and we have a 9 a.m. meeting tomorrow to finalize the partnership details." As Michael left, the house seemed suddenly larger, the silence between David and me expanding to fill every corner. We stood facing each other in the living room, husband and wife, yet strangers in many ways. "I don't know who you are," David said quietly. 7 years of marriage, and I've been living with someone I never actually saw." The words stung, but I couldn't deny their truth. "You never wanted to see that part of me," I replied. "From the beginning, you put me in a box labeled wife and refused to acknowledge anything that didn't fit that narrow definition." "That's not fair," he protested. "You deliberately kept secrets. Only after you made it clear you weren't interested in the truth," I countered, feeling 7 years of suppressed frustration rising to the surface. "Do you know how many times I tried to talk to you about my business in those early years? How many times you changed the subject or looked bored or patted my hand and said, 'That's nice, dear'?" David ran a hand through his hair, a habit when he was distressed. "I didn't realize—" "Exactly," I interrupted. "You didn't realize because you weren't paying attention. You were too busy constructing a narrative about who I was and what I was capable of to notice who I actually am." The hard truth hung between us like a physical presence. David moved to the window, looking out at the garden I'd designed, another aspect of our life together that he'd never fully appreciated. "I need to ask you something," he said finally, turning back to face me. and I need you to be completely honest." I nodded, bracing myself. "Are you still in love with me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or has pretending to be someone else for all these years killed whatever feelings you once had?" It was the one question I hadn't prepared for, the one vulnerability I hadn't allowed myself to examine too closely. As the silence stretched between us, I realized David was holding his breath, waiting for my answer, an answer that would determine whether we had any future together at all. "Yes," I said quietly, answering his question about whether I still loved him. But not the version of us we've been living. I fell in love with a brilliant, ambitious attorney who challenged me intellectually. Somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your equal and started seeing me as an accessory to your success. David absorbed this, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive, a promising sign. "I need time to process all of this," he said finally. "Not just the business revelation, but what it means for us." I nodded, understanding his need for space. "I have an early meeting tomorrow with the Donovan team. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." As I turned to leave, David spoke again. "Sarah, wait. There's one more thing I need to know." I paused, looking back at him. "If I hadn't dismissed you so thoroughly at that dinner last night, would you have gone through with the public revelation today? Was that the final straw?" It was a perceptive question, one that cut to the heart of my decision-making process. "The business announcement was already scheduled," I replied honestly. "But I might have prepared you privately first if last night hadn't been such a stark reminder of how you see me." He nodded, accepting this truth. "Good night, Sarah." "Good night, David." Sleep eluded me that night, my mind racing with the implications of the day's events. By 5 a.m., I gave up trying and slipped quietly downstairs to make coffee. To my surprise, David was already in the kitchen, staring out, the window at the garden beginning to emerge in the pre-dawn light. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked, moving to the coffee maker. He shook his head. "Too much to think about." We worked around each other in silence, the familiar domestic choreography at odds with the profound shift in our relationship. I prepared my usual morning smoothie while David toasted a bagel, neither of us acknowledging the strangeness of maintaining these routines amid such upheaval. "I've been reading about you," David said finally, sliding his tablet across the counter. The screen displayed a business profile from 3 years earlier. "Rising force in commercial real estate. Walker Properties reshapes downtown landscape." "Research," he explained, seeing my questioning look. "I spent half the night trying to understand what you've built." "And?" I prompted, curious about his conclusions. "It's impressive," he admitted, the word clearly difficult for him. "The Madison District redevelopment strategy, the sustainability initiatives, the community integration model, these aren't small achievements, Sarah." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciating his acknowledgement. David studied me across the kitchen island, as if seeing me through new eyes. "Why real estate?" he asked suddenly. "Of all the businesses you could have pursued, why commercial property development?" The question surprised me, not because it was difficult to answer, but because in 7 years of marriage, David had never asked about my professional passions. "I believe in the power of physical spaces to shape communities," I explained, warming to the topic. "Commercial buildings aren't just assets on a balance sheet. They're where people work, connect, create value. By thoughtfully developing those spaces, I can influence not just economic outcomes, but social ones too." David listened attentively, nodding occasionally as I outlined my vision for urban development. I realized this was perhaps the first genuine professional conversation we'd ever had. "The Downtown Revitalization Committee," he said when I finished. "That really is central to your business model, isn't it? Not just a side project." "It's the heart of everything we do," I confirmed. "By investing in community infrastructure alongside our commercial properties, We create ecosystems rather than just buildings. Property values increase, tenant satisfaction improves, and the community benefits. Everyone wins. David glanced at his watch. You should get ready for your meeting with Donovan. The moment of connection was broken, but something had shifted subtly between us. For perhaps the first time, David had engaged with me as a business professional, rather than merely his wife. As I prepared for the day, selecting another power suit from the collection I kept hidden at the back of my closet, I contemplated the next phase of this personal and professional transition. The public revelation was complete, but the integration of my dual identities and the potential recalibration of my marriage was just beginning. By 8:30 a.m., I was back at Parkview Tower, reviewing final documentation for the Donovan partnership with my legal team. The press coverage continued to expand, with national business publications now picking up the story. My PR director had organized the inquiries into categories, allowing me to focus on those that aligned with our strategic objectives. The business. Journal wants to do a feature on women in commercial real estate with you as the centerpiece, she reported. And Commercial Property Monthly is requesting an exclusive on the Madison District Development Plan. I approved both, along with several other strategic media opportunities, while declining those that focused primarily on the personal angle. My goal was to establish Walker Properties' business credibility, not to become a celebrity. At 9:30 a.m. sharp, the Donovan development team arrived for our partnership finalization meeting. Michael greeted me warmly, followed by his executives and legal counsel. "You've certainly made a splash," Michael commented as we walked to the conference room. "My phone hasn't stopped ringing with people asking if I knew about your double life." "And did you?" I asked, curious about his response. He smiled slightly. "I told them I've always made it a point to know who I'm doing business with, which is true, just not the whole truth." The meeting proceeded efficiently, with both teams reviewing the final partnership structure for the Madison District development. Walker Properties would contribute the land and oversee construction, while Donovan would provide financing and handle tenant acquisition. The resulting mixed-use development would transform 5 city blocks of previously underutilized space into a vibrant urban hub. As we concluded, Michael pulled me aside. "How are things at home?" David seemed processing when I left last night. "It's complicated," I acknowledged. 7 years of misconception isn't easily resolved. He nodded sympathetically. "For what it's worth, I think he was genuinely trying to understand your work. The questions he asked were thoughtful, not defensive." This insight warmed me unexpectedly. Perhaps there was more potential for growth in our relationship than I had dared to hope. Back in my office, I found a message from Rachel Chen requesting lunch. Given everything happening, I almost declined, but Rachel had been my guide through every major business decision for the past decade. Her perspective would be valuable now more than ever. We met at a small bistro several blocks from Parkview Tower, a discreet location where we could speak freely. "The business world is positively buzzing about you," Rachel observed as we settled at our table. "Sarah Walker, the secret real estate mogul. You've become an overnight sensation." "Hardly overnight," I replied with a wry smile. "More like 7 years in the making." "And how are you handling the transition, being fully visible after so long in the shadows?" I considered the question carefully. "It's liberating, exhausting, but liberating. No more code switching between worlds, no more careful omissions and half-truths." Rachel nodded, studying me over her reading glasses. "And David? How is he adapting to discovering his wife has been a successful CEO all along?" "He's trying," I said, surprising myself with the assessment. "Last night and this morning, he actually asked about my business, not to criticize or dismiss, but to understand. That's more than I expected, honestly." "So what's your strategy moving forward?" Rachel asked, shifting into the mentor role that had guided me through countless business challenges, both professionally and personally. It was the question I'd been contemplating since the revelation. What did I want from this new phase of my life? Now that my professional accomplishments were public, what kind of relationship did I want with David, if any? Professionally, the path is clear, I began. The Donovan Partnership launches the Madison District Development, which becomes the showcase for Walker Properties' integrated community development model. We leverage the current media attention to establish our brand identity, then focus on execution rather than publicity. Rachel nodded approvingly. And personally? That's less clear, I admitted. Part of me wants to simply walk away, start fresh with my identity finally intact. But another part wonders if David and I could build something new, something authentic, now that the deception is behind us. What would that look like? Rachel pressed, always pushing me to envision concrete outcomes rather than abstract possibilities. I thought about our brief connection that morning, the first genuine professional conversation we'd ever shared. Equality, I said finally. Real partnership, not the one-sided arrangement we've had. David seeing me, really seeing me, as his equal in capability and ambition. No more diminishing comments, no more public undermining. And do you think he's capable of that transformation? Rachel asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. It was the critical question, the one that would determine whether our marriage had any future. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I think I need to give him the opportunity to try. Rachel considered this, then nodded slowly. A conditional, second chance with clear expectations and boundaries. Exactly, I confirmed, feeling the strategy crystallize as we discussed it. I can't change how David sees me. Only he can do that. But I can be clear about what I will and won't accept moving forward. As we finished lunch, I felt a growing sense of clarity. The professional path forward was straightforward. Execute our business plan, leverage the current attention to strengthen our market position, and continue building Walker Properties' reputation for innovative urban development. The personal path was more complex, but at least I now had a framework for approaching it. I would give David the opportunity to know the real me, to adapt to this new reality, but with clear expectations about how I deserve to be treated. If he couldn't make that adjustment, I was prepared to move forward alone. Returning to Parkview Tower, I found a delivery waiting in my office, a simple arrangement of white roses with a card. Congratulations on your public debut. The business community's gain is my significant loss. Your secret was safe with me. M. The initials belong to Mark Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Development Group and one of my closest business confidants over the years. Unlike David, Mark had known about my dual identity from the beginning, having encountered me first in my professional capacity before meeting me socially as David's wife. He'd kept my secret faithfully, even playing along at social functions, where David introduced me as my wife. She handles our charity work. The rose arrangement was his way of acknowledging that those complicated dynamics were now over. I could finally be recognized publicly for my accomplishments. I placed the flowers on my conference table, just as Emma appeared at the door. Ms. Walker, the building management team is here for your meeting about the tenant reception next week. The business of running Walker Properties continued, regardless of the personal drama unfolding in parallel. For the next several hours, I focused entirely on operational details, lease renewals, maintenance schedules, security upgrades, the unglamorous but essential components of commercial property management. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from David. Board meeting running late. Can we talk over dinner? I'll cook. The offer surprised me. David rarely cooked, generally considering it my domain. His willingness to prepare dinner suggested he was at least attempting to recalibrate our relationship. I'll be home around 7, I replied, then returned to my work. As I wrapped up the day's final tasks, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been preparing to reveal my professional identity while maintaining the careful separation that had defined the past 7 years. Now, that wall had come down completely, with consequences still unfolding in both my business and personal lives. The revelation had been necessary, both for Walker Properties' growth and for my own well-being. The question now was whether David could adapt to this new reality, whether our marriage could evolve into something authentic rather than the unequal arrangement it had been. As I gathered my things to leave, Emma handed me one final message slip. Mr. Keller called from the law firm upstairs. He'd like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow regarding their lease renewal. I smiled slightly, appreciating the irony. David's managing partner now wanted to negotiate directly with me, the same woman who had sat silently through countless firm dinners, dismissed as merely decorative. Schedule it for 11 a.m., I instructed, and let's prepare the standard renewal package plus the community engagement options we discussed. Driving home that evening, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction, not vindication. This had never been about revenge, but the simple pleasure of finally being recognized. For my capabilities and achievements, the road ahead remained uncertain, particularly with David. But one thing was clear. I would never again accept being dismissed as just anything. Whatever came next would be on my terms, with my full identity acknowledged and respected. As I pulled into our driveway, I could see David through the kitchen window, moving around as he prepared dinner. Tonight would be the first test of whether our marriage could evolve into something new, something authentic, equal, and based on mutual respect rather than convenient misconceptions. I took a deep breath and headed inside, ready to discover what might be possible now that the truth was finally out. I arrived home shortly after 7 to find David in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as he put the finishing touches on dinner. The rich aroma of coq au vin filled the air. He'd prepared my favorite dish, something he hadn't done in years. "This is a surprise," I said, setting my briefcase on the counter. "I can't remember the last time you cooked." "Neither can I," he admitted, glancing up briefly from the stove. "Figured it was time to break some patterns." I moved to the wine cabinet, selecting a bottle of Pinot Noir that would complement the meal. As I opened it to breathe, David arranged 2 place settings at the kitchen island rather than the formal dining room where we usually ate. Another small break from routine, another sign that he was making an effort. "How was your day?" Ito asked, the mundane question carrying unusual weight under the circumstances. "Productive," I replied, pouring us each a glass of wine. We finalized the Donovan partnership, met with building management, and handled about 50 press inquiries. "Yours?" "Strange," he said after a moment's consideration. "Everyone at the firm was talking about the Walker Properties announcement. No one made the connection to you, though. They still think of you as just David's wife," I finished when he trailed off. David winced slightly. I deserved that. He served the meal, and we sat facing each other across the kitchen island, a casual arrangement that somehow felt more intimate than our usual formal dining. For several minutes, we ate in silence, the underlying tension making even this familiar activity feel precarious. "I met with James Keller today," David said finally, referring to his firm's managing partner. "He wants to form a committee to review our lease options now that the building's ownership has been revealed." "I'm meeting with him tomorrow," I replied. "My assistant scheduled it this afternoon." David looked up sharply. "You're personally handling our lease renewal?" "I handle all major tenant negotiations," I explained. "Nothing special about Keller and Associates in that regard." He absorbed this, his expression unreadable. "That will be interesting. I keep my business and personal lives separate, David. Your firm will receive the same fair treatment as any other tenant." He nodded slowly, taking a sip of wine. "I believe you. It's just disorienting. 24 hours ago, I thought I understood my life, my marriage. Now everything's been turned upside down. The vulnerable admission hung between us as we continued eating. Outside, twilight deepened into evening, the garden lights automatically illuminating the landscape I'd designed when we first bought the house. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," David said as we finished the meal, "about why you chose real estate development. The way you described it, creating environments that shape communities, not just building properties, it was passionate, purposeful." "It is," I confirmed. "I realize now that I never asked," he continued, his gaze fixed on his wine glass. "In 7 years of marriage, I never once asked what drives you professionally. I was assumed to not have professional drives," I finished for him. "That planning charity galas and dinner parties fulfilled my ambitions." David didn't deny it. "I've been thinking about why I so completely failed to see who you really are. At first, I wanted to blame you for the deception, but the truth is more uncomfortable than that." He rose, carrying our empty plates to the sink in another break from our usual division of household labor. "The truth," he continued, his back to me as he rinsed the dishes, "is that I liked the version of our marriage where I was the accomplished one, the provider, the success story. It was comfortable believing I was the one with the important career, while you handled our domestic life." The admission cost him visibly, his shoulders tense as he placed the dishes in the dishwasher. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said quietly, appreciating the difficult self-reflection he was demonstrating. David turned back to face me, leaning against the counter. "I keep thinking about all those business dinners where I dismissed your contributions, changed the subject when you tried to share ideas. Or worse, used you as an example of knowing your place. How did you stand it for so long?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for years, one that had grown increasingly difficult to answer as Walker Properties expanded and my professional accomplishments accumulated in parallel with my growing dissatisfaction at home. "At first, it was simpler to let you believe what you wanted," I explained. "Your assumptions about me made your life neater, and confronting them seemed unnecessary when I could just build my business separately. But over time," David prompted when I trailed off. "Over time, the gap between who I was with you and who I was in my professional life became harder to bridge. Every time you introduced me as just my wife, or dismissed my thoughts in public, it felt like a small erasure of my true self." David flinched, but didn't interrupt. "Last night at dinner was just the culmination of years of those small erasures," I continued. "Hearing you mock the idea that I could understand business while sitting across from people who actually report to me professionally, something finally broke." The kitchen fell silent as David absorbed this. Through the windows, I could see the moon rising over our carefully landscaped garden. Another part of my life where I'd allowed him to believe his narrative rather than assert my own vision. "Where does that leave us?" he asked finally, voicing the question that had been hovering unspoken between us since the revelation. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Part of me wants to believe we could start fresh, build a relationship based on who we truly are rather than who we've pretended to be. But another part wonders if the patterns are too deeply established, the damage too extensive." David nodded, accepting this uncertainty. "For what it's worth, I'd like to try. Not to save the marriage we had. I see now that it was built on false premises. But to discover if there's something authentic possible between the real you and the man I hope I can become." It was more than I'd expected. A genuine acknowledgement of the problem and a willingness to change rather than defensive justification or wounded pride. "What would that look like to you?" I asked, curious about his vision for this potential new beginning. David considered the question carefully. "Honesty, for a start. No more convenient fictions or comfortable assumptions. I want to know who you really are, professionally and personally. And equality, I added. Real partnership, not the unbalanced arrangement we've had. Yes, he agreed, though I could see the effort it cost him. Though I expect that will be the harder adjustment for me. Truly seeing you as my equal in ambition and capability, rather than reflexively assuming I know better. His self-awareness was promising, suggesting he might actually be capable of the transformation our relationship would require. It won't happen overnight, I cautioned. 7 years of patterns don't change in a day. I know, David acknowledged. But last night's dinner was a wake-up call I desperately needed. Watching you today at that reception, seeing how respected you are in the business community. It forced me to confront how completely I've misjudged you, and what that says about me. We moved to the living room, carrying our wine glasses, the kitchen tasks left unfinished. A small departure from our usual routine, where I would have insisted on cleaning up immediately. Sitting across from each other, the physical distance between us mirroring the emotional space we were navigating, I considered David's proposal. Could we truly build something new from the ashes of our previous understanding? Or would old patterns inevitably reassert themselves once the shock of revelation faded? I'm willing to try, I said finally. Not to return to what we had, that relationship is gone, but to explore what might be possible now that the truth is out. But, David prompted, sensing my reservation. But I need you to understand something important. He looked at me attentively, waiting. I won't diminish myself again, I stated clearly. I won't pretend to be less than I am, professionally or personally, to make you comfortable. If we move forward, it has to be with my whole self visible and valued. I understand, he replied, his expression serious. And I wouldn't want you to. I've spent the day reading about what you've built with Walker Properties. It's extraordinary, Sarah. I'd be a fool to ask you to hide that light again. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, droplets illuminated by the garden lights as they pattered against the windows. The sound created a cocoon of intimacy around our conversation, a private space to contemplate this potential new beginning. One day at a time, I suggested, setting my empty wine glass on the coffee table. No grand promises or dramatic declarations, just honest effort to see each other clearly and build something authentic. David nodded, accepting these terms. One day at a time, he echoed. As we sat in companionable silence, watching the rain transform our garden into a glistening wonderland, I felt a cautious optimism taking root. The revelation of my professional identity had been necessary, not just for Walker Properties' growth, but for my own integrity and well-being. Whether David and I could transform our marriage remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, I felt fully present in my own home, no longer divided between competing versions of myself. Whatever came next, I would face it as my complete, authentic self, never again just anything, but Sarah Walker Mitchell in full. The next morning arrived with a sense of purpose. I woke early, my mind already mapping out the critical day ahead. The schedule was packed. A strategy meeting with my executive team at 8:30, the lease negotiation with Keller Associates at 11, followed by lunch with potential investors, and finally, the formal announcement of our partnership with Donovan. Development at a press conference scheduled for 3 p.m. David and I had parted amicably the night before, each retreating to separate rooms to process our conversation. His willingness to acknowledge his role in our dysfunctional dynamic had surprised me, offering a glimmer of hope that perhaps something salvageable remained in our relationship. Still, years of ingrained patterns wouldn't change overnight. We would need to prove our commitment to this new understanding through actions, not just words. As I dressed in one of my most powerful suits, a charcoal gray ensemble with subtle pinstripes that projected confidence without ostentation, I considered how to approach the meeting with James Keller. He'd known me for years as David's wife, the pleasant hostess at firm events, the woman who arranged dinner parties and charity galas. Today, he would meet me as Sarah Walker, CEO of Walker Properties and owner of the building housing his prestigious law firm. While I finished applying my makeup, I heard David moving around in the kitchen below, another break in our routine. Typically, he would already be at the office by this hour, leaving me to handle the domestic morning rituals alone. Downstairs, I found him preparing 2 travel mugs of coffee. "I thought you might want this for the road," he said, handing me one. "You mentioned having an early start." The small gesture struck me as significant. Not just the coffee itself, but the fact that he'd remembered my schedule and adjusted his own routine accordingly. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched. "This helps." "Your meeting with Keller is at 11?" he asked, sipping from his own mug. I nodded. "Standard lease renewal discussion, nothing to worry about." "I'm not worried," David said, surprising. Me again. "James can be intimidating in negotiations, but something tells me you've handled tougher adversaries." Was that respect in his tone? The subtle acknowledgement of my professional capabilities felt unfamiliar coming from him, but welcome nonetheless. "A few," I acknowledged with a small smile. "Your firm will receive fair terms, David. No special treatment, positive or negative." "I know," he replied. "That's who you are. Fair, strategic, focused on the big picture. I just never applied those observations to my professional identity because you didn't believe I had one." I finished for him. The honest self-assessment was another, promising sign. David wasn't just saying the right things, he seemed to be genuinely reckoning with his previous blindness. We left the house together, another departure from our usual separate morning departures. As we reached our cars, David paused. "Good luck today with the Donovan announcement. From what I read, it's significant for Walker Properties." "Thank you," I replied, momentarily disoriented by this new dynamic, my husband acknowledging my professional accomplishments as real and substantial. "Good luck with your Mason deposition." His eyes widened slightly. "You remembered about that?" "Of course," I said simply. "Just because you didn't see my career doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention to yours." We parted with an awkward moment of hesitation, neither of us quite ready for the casual goodbye kiss that had once been automatic, yet both sensing that our standard formal nod no longer fit either. Eventually, David settled for a gentle touch on my arm before heading to his car. The drive downtown gave me time to mentally transition from the personal complexities at home to the professional challenges awaiting me at Parkview Tower. By the time I pulled into my reserved parking space, I was fully focused on the day's strategic objectives. "Morning, Ms. Walker," Emma greeted me as I entered the executive suite. "The team is ready in the conference room, and I've prepared the Keller Associates lease renewal package as requested." I nodded, setting my briefcase on my desk and taking the folder she offered. Inside was the standard lease renewal agreement we offered all tenants, along with our community engagement options. Initiatives ranging from pro bono legal services for neighborhood organizations to participation in sustainability programs within the building. No special terms, but also no punitive conditions, exactly what any other valued tenant would receive. The morning strategy meeting progressed efficiently, with each department head reporting on their progress integrating our newly public identity into their operations. Our marketing director presented updated branding materials that would roll out across all properties by the end of the month. The finance team outlined preliminary responses from investors now that our ownership structure was transparent. Legal reviewed potential regulatory considerations given our expanded public profile. Throughout it all, I maintained the calm, decisive leadership style that had built Walker Properties from a small portfolio into a significant market force. If my team noticed any distraction from the personal upheaval of the past 24 hours, they gave no indication. At 10:45, Emma appeared at the conference room door. "Mr. Keller and his team have arrived early. I've placed them in the East Conference Room with refreshments. I nodded, gathering my materials. Perfect. Please let them know I'll join them. In 5 minutes. As my executive team dispersed to their respective responsibilities, Rachel Chen lingered behind. "How are you really doing?" she asked once we were alone. Yesterday was quite the revelation, both professionally and personally. "I'm adjusting," I replied honestly. "The professional transition has been smoother than expected, the personal more complicated." "Surprisingly hopeful, actually," I admitted. "David seems genuinely willing to reconsider our relationship dynamic. Whether that translates to meaningful change remains to be seen, but it's more than I expected." Rachel studied me carefully. "Just remember, you deserve a partnership based on equality and mutual respect, not convenience or habit. Don't settle for less, even if it seems easier in the short term." Her concern touched me. Rachel had witnessed firsthand the gradual erosion of my marriage as David's dismissive attitude had grown more pronounced over the years. She'd been the one encouraging me to assert my true identity long before I felt ready to take that step. "I won't," I promised. "This isn't about saving what we had. That relationship is gone. It's about discovering if something new and authentic is possible." She nodded, satisfied with my response. "Now go show James Keller why you're the most formidable property owner in the city. Just because he's known you as David's wife doesn't mean he can't learn to respect you as his landlord." With that bolstering reminder, I made my way to the East Conference Room. Through the glass walls, I could see James Keller and 3 other partners from the firm seated around the table, reviewing documents while making small talk. None of them noticed me immediately, giving me a moment to observe their body language. Slightly tense, papers arranged precisely, the unmistakable preparation of attorneys ready for a negotiation. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door. "Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for coming." James Keller rose immediately, his expression a fascinating mixture of confusion, recalibration, and professional courtesy. The other partners followed suit, their reactions ranging from surprise to mild embarrassment as they recognized me. "Mrs. Mitchell," Keller began, then quickly corrected himself. "I mean, Ms. Walker, thank you for meeting with us. Please, sit." I gestured to their chairs, taking my place at the head of the table. "I understand you have questions about your lease renewal given the recent ownership revelation." Keller cleared his throat, visibly working to reconcile the woman he'd known socially with the business executive now sitting before him. "Yes, well, it was quite a surprise to discover that our building is owned by your partner's wife?" I supplied calmly when he struggled to find an appropriate phrasing. "Precisely," he acknowledged, regaining some composure. "It raises certain questions about our lease terms going forward, whether special considerations might apply given the personal connection." I opened the folder Emma had prepared, removing the standard lease renewal package and sliding it across. The table. Keller Associates has been a valued tenant for 5 years. This package represents our standard renewal terms for all tenants in good standing. Fair market rates with options for community engagement that provide mutual benefit. The attorneys exchanged glances, clearly having expected either preferential treatment or possibly punitive terms given David's behavior. The straightforward professionalism caught them off guard. "I assure you, gentlemen," I continued, "Walker Properties maintains strict separation between business relationships and personal matters. Your firm will receive exactly the same consideration as any other tenant. No more, no less." As Keller and his team reviewed the documents, I could see the gradual shift in their demeanor. The initial discomfort at negotiating with someone they'd previously dismissed as merely David's wife gave way to professional respect as they recognized the fairness and strategic vision reflected in the terms. "These community engagement options," one of the younger partners noted, "they align remarkably well with our pro bono program initiatives." We found that integrating tenant expertise with neighborhood needs creates sustainable value for everyone involved, I explained. We found that integrating tenant expertise with neighborhood needs creates sustainable value for everyone involved, I explained. Your firm's legal services could make a significant difference for several organizations in our development zones. For the next 45 minutes, we discussed specific terms, scheduling, and implementation details. Throughout the conversation, I maintained my professional composure, neither seeking approval nor showing any sign that these men had witnessed me being publicly diminished by my husband countless times at firm events. By the time they rose to leave, the attorneys had transitioned completely from seeing me as David's wife to recognizing me as a formidable business leader in my own right. The transformation was visible in their body language, their tone, and, most tellingly, in the respectful way they now addressed me. "Ms. Walker," Keller said as we concluded, extending his hand. "This has been most illuminating. We'll review these terms with our committee and respond formally by the end of the week." "I look forward to it," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Keller Associates has been an excellent anchor tenant. I hope we can continue our relationship on these new, more transparent terms." As they filed out, I noticed David standing in the hallway, having apparently just finished a meeting of his own in another conference room. He exchanged brief greetings with his colleagues before approaching my door. "How did it go?" he asked, lingering in the doorway. "Professionally," I replied simply. "I think Mr. Keller has finally recognized that I understand lease terms and market valuations after all." David winced slightly at the reminder of his previous dismissiveness, but nodded. I saw his expression as they left. "You impressed him." The observation wasn't framed as surprise or disbelief, but as simple acknowledgement of my capability, another small but significant shift in our dynamic. "The Donovan announcement is at 3? He asked, changing the subject. I nodded. "Press. Conference in the atrium." David hesitated, then asked, "Would it be inappropriate if I attended? Not as your husband, necessarily, but as a tenant with interest in the building's future developments." Request surprised me. Was this another gesture of recognition, an attempt to publicly acknowledge my professional identity after years of diminishment? "That would be fine," I replied carefully. "All tenants are welcome." As David left to return to his firm's offices upstairs, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The morning had gone exactly as planned professionally, with each piece falling into place for Walker Properties' continued strategic positioning in the market. The personal terrain remained more uncertain, but David's small gestures of respect and recognition suggested at least the possibility of genuine change. With the Keller meeting successfully concluded, I turned my attention to the afternoon's critical announcement. The Donovan partnership represented not just a significant business expansion, but also the first major public initiative of Walker Properties' new transparent era. Everything about today's press conference, from the positioning to the messaging, to my own presentation, would set the tone for this next chapter of my professional life. As I reviewed my talking points one final time, I felt a sense of alignment I hadn't experienced in years. The compartmentalization that had defined my existence was dissolving, allowing me to bring my full self to every aspect of my life. Whatever happened with David, this integration of my personal and professional identities was something I would never relinquish again. The press conference announcing the Walker Properties partnership with Donovan Development was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. The building's atrium had been transformed into a media venue, with a small stage, professional lighting, and rows of chairs already filling with journalists, business leaders, and community representatives. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see the growing crowd, including several tenants from throughout the building. My PR director handed me the final press packet for review. "Everything's ready, Ms. Walker. We've positioned the announcement to emphasize the community development aspects of the partnership, rather than just the financial details. It aligns perfectly with your vision." I nodded approval, scanning the Y document one last time. The partnership with Donovan would transform the Madison district from an underutilized collection of aging properties into a vibrant, mixed-use neighborhood with affordable housing, green spaces, and sustainable commercial development. It represented everything I'd been working toward, not just profitable growth, but meaningful community impact. Ms. Walker? Emma appeared at the door. It's time. As I gathered my notes and smoothed my jacket, I caught a glimpse of David entering the atrium below. He was speaking with Michael Donovan, their conversation appearing relaxed and professional. When Michael pointed toward my office, David glanced up, meeting my gaze across the distance. He offered a small nod of encouragement, subtle but genuine. Walking to the stage a few minutes later, I felt a strange sense of completion. The journey that had begun 7 years ago with a small inheritance and a vision for urban development had reached a pivotal milestone. The path had required me to live a divided life for years, but today those divisions were finally dissolving. Good afternoon, I began, looking out over the assembled crowd. Thank you all for joining us for this important announcement. As I outlined the partnership details, I noticed David standing at the back of the room, listening attentively, not checking his phone, not looking bored or dismissive, but genuinely engaged with the business strategy I was presenting. It was such a stark contrast to his behavior at countless social events where I'd tried to participate in business discussions only to be subtly, or not so subtly, silenced. The press conference proceeded smoothly, with Michael joining me on stage for the formal signing and joint statement. The questions from reporters were substantive, focused on the development strategy and economic impact rather than the sensational aspects of my dual identity revelation. My PR team had done an excellent job steering the narrative toward Walker Properties' business vision. As the formal portion concluded and attendees broke into networking groups, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers and potential partners. Through the crowd, I occasionally caught glimpses of David, who had remained at a respectful distance, allowing me this professional moment without inserting himself. Nearly an hour later, as the event was winding down, David approached. He had waited until I was momentarily alone, showing unexpected sensitivity to the complexities of our situation. That was impressive, he said simply. The scope of the Madison District vision, the integration of commercial development with community needs, it's extraordinary, Sarah. Coming from David, this straightforward acknowledgement of my professional accomplishment felt more significant than the effusive praise I'd received from others. Thank you, I replied. While I was telling everyone you were planning charity, Gallus, he noted, the self-recrimination evident in his tone. Before I could respond, Emma appeared at my elbow. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the mayor's office is on the phone. They've seen the announcement and want to discuss potential public-private partnerships for the eastern section of the development. I should take that, I said to David. He nodded. Of course. I'll see you at home. The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Would we continue the process of rebuilding our relationship? Was there a foundation for something new between us? Yes, I decided. I'll be there around 7. As David left, I returned to my office to take the mayor's call, the remainder of the afternoon passing in a blur of follow-up meetings and strategic planning sessions. By the time I gathered my things to leave, the city was bathed in the golden light of early evening, the skyscrapers gleaming against the darkening sky. The drive home gave me time to reflect on the remarkable transformation of the past 48 hours. The professional revelation had gone according to plan, positioning Walker Properties for its next phase of growth. The personal revelation had been more unpredictable, exposing the deep fissures in my marriage, but also revealing unexpected potential for genuine change. When I arrived home, I found David in the kitchen again, this time arranging takeout from my favorite Vietnamese restaurant, on plates. I thought you might be tired after such a big day, he explained, noticing my surprised expression. Seemed simpler than cooking. The consideration behind the gesture touched me once again. David was demonstrating through actions rather than words that he was willing to recalibrate our relationship. We ate at the kitchen island, sharing details of our respective days. For the first time in our marriage, David asked thoughtful questions about my business strategies and listened attentively to my responses. In turn, I engaged with his description of a complex legal challenge, offering perspectives that he considered with genuine interest rather than reflexive dismissal. It was a simple dinner conversation, yet revolutionary in its mutual respect and authentic engagement. As we cleared the plates together, another small but significant break from our established patterns. David paused, his expression growing serious. "I've been thinking about something all day," he said. "When you revealed your ownership of Parkview Tower, you could have used that leverage against me, against the firm. After years of dismissive treatment, no one would have blamed you for some measure of retribution. But you didn't. You offered fair terms, professional courtesy, respect." I considered his observation. "Revenge was never the point, David. I didn't build Walker Properties to prove something to you or anyone else. I built it because I love creating spaces that transform communities, because I'm good at seeing potential where others don't. The revelation was about authenticity, not retribution." He nodded slowly. "That's what I realized today, watching you at that press conference. This isn't just a business for you, it's a passion, a calling, and I completely missed it for 7 years because I couldn't see beyond my own preconceptions. The frank admission hung between us, more powerful in its honesty than any elaborate apology could have been." "I can't change the past, Sarah," David continued after a moment. "I can't undo years of dismissing your capabilities or treating you as less than my equal. But I can promise you this: I will never make that mistake again. If you're willing to try building something new between us, I'm committed to seeing you, really seeing you, as you are." It was the most genuine moment we'd shared in years, perhaps ever. The protective walls I'd constructed to compartmentalize my life were fully down now, allowing me to be present as my complete self. "I'd like that," I replied simply. "Not a return to what was, but something new. Equal, authentic, honest." "Equal, authentic, honest," he repeated, nodding. "A fresh start." 3 months later, I stood at the podium during the groundbreaking ceremony for the Madison District development, the culmination of years of careful planning now becoming reality. In the front row sat David, watching with genuine pride as I outlined Walker Properties' vision for the project. Our marriage was still evolving, the new dynamic requiring constant attention and occasional course corrections. There were moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, times when David automatically began to interrupt me, or when I instinctively held back my opinions. But each time, we recognized these slips and recalibrated, committed to building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than convenient misconceptions. The professional world had adjusted quickly to the revelation of my identity. Walker Properties' reputation had only strengthened with transparency, and our partnership with Donovan Development had opened doors to even more ambitious projects. What had begun as my grandmother's modest legacy had grown into a transformative force in urban development. As I concluded my remarks and symbolically turned the first shovel of earth for the project, I caught David's eye in the audience. His smile carried none of the condescension that had once been habitual, only authentic admiration and respect. The journey from just David's wife to acknowledged business leader had been long and at times painful. The parallel journey from unequal marriage to authentic partnership remained ongoing, its ultimate destination still uncertain. But standing there, fully integrated in my professional and personal identity for the first time in 7 years, I felt a profound sense of wholeness. Whatever the future held, I would face it as my complete, authentic self, never again diminished or compartmentalized, never again just anything. I was Sarah Walker Mitchell, Wife, CEO, visionary, finally seen, finally whole, finally free. Emma knocked gently on my office door early Friday morning, her expression a mix of hesitation and urgency that immediately caught my attention. It had been nearly 4 months since the public revelation of my identity as the owner of Walker Properties, and life had settled into a new rhythm, professionally triumphant, personally tentative, but promising. "Ms. Walker, there's something you should see," she said, placing a manila folder on my desk. I opened it to find a real estate listing, a detailed prospectus for the Riverside Residences, a luxury apartment complex that had been on my acquisition radar for months. The complex sat adjacent to 3 Walker Properties buildings in the emerging arts district, making it a strategic piece in our neighborhood development plan. "This just went on the market this morning," Emma explained. "Privately circulated to select investors before the public listing next week." I skimmed the details, noting the surprisingly reasonable asking price. This is well below market value. Why would Harrison Development sell at this price point? "That's what's interesting," Emma continued. "According to my source, Thomas, Harrison is facing a liquidity crisis. His offshore investments collapsed, and he needs to offload properties quickly. The catch is, he's only entertaining all cash offers with a 7-day closing window." I leaned back in my chair, calculating rapidly. Walker Properties had the cash reserves to make such an offer, but it would deplete our acquisition fund for the quarter. Still, the opportunity was too perfect to ignore. The property's location would complete our Arts District portfolio and accelerate our revitalization timeline by nearly 2 years. "There's one more thing," Emma added, her voice dropping slightly. "I understand Jessica Turner is showing the property today to potential buyers. Apparently, she's moved from Keller Associates to commercial real estate." I kept my expression neutral, though the name caused an immediate tightening in my chest. Jessica Turner, David's former secretary, and the woman who had nearly broken up our marriage before my business revelation changed everything. "Does David know she's back in town?" I asked, my voice carefully measured. "I'm not sure," Emma replied. "But there's a rumor she's representing a major out-of-state investment group that's aggressively entering our market." I closed the folder, my decision made. "Schedule a viewing for this afternoon. Don't mention that it's for me. Just book it under Walker Properties. And Emma," I added as she turned to leave, "let's keep this between us for now." After Emma left, I sat contemplating this unexpected development. The Riverside Residences would be a perfect addition to our portfolio, but the involvement of Jessica Turner complicated matters considerably. 4 months ago, just days before I had revealed my ownership of Walker Properties, I had overheard a conversation between David and Jessica that had rocked the foundation of my marriage. They had been planning to leave together, Jessica leaving her position as his secretary, David planning to divorce me once a major contract was secured. My revelation of my business success had changed everything, causing David to reevaluate. Not just his perception of me, but his entire relationship with Jessica as well. In the aftermath, Jessica had left town abruptly while David and I began the careful work of rebuilding our marriage on more equal footing. We hadn't spoken of her since, an unacknowledged ghost in our fragile reconciliation. Now she was back, potentially standing between Walker Properties and a crucial acquisition. The irony wasn't lost on me. I reached for my phone, hesitating only briefly before dialing David's number. Our new commitment to honesty meant no more strategic omissions, even when they might be easier. "Sarah," he answered, the warmth in his voice still a novelty after years of perfunctory greetings. "I was just thinking about you. The Mason brief just came back from the court with a favorable ruling." "That's great news," I replied sincerely. "Congratulations." "Are we still on for dinner tonight?" "I made reservations at Emilio's." I took a deep breath. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Something's come up. A potential acquisition that's time-sensitive. I'll need to view the property this afternoon and work with the team on an offer. Tonight." "No problem," David said easily, another sign of our changing dynamic. Anything exciting? Riverside Residences, I said, watching my words carefully. It just came on the market privately, significantly undervalued with a very short window for offers. There was a brief pause on the line. That's a fantastic location. Perfect complement to your Arts District properties. I appreciated his immediate understanding of the business implications, a marked change from the man who had once glazed over at any mention of my professional interests. David, I continued, there's something else you should know. Jessica Turner is apparently showing the property. She's representing a competing buyer. The silence that followed was heavier, laden with unspoken complications. Finally, David cleared his throat. I see, he said simply. I hadn't heard she was back in town. Would you rather I passed on this opportunity? I asked directly. In our old marriage, I would have proceeded without consultation, maintaining the separation between my business and personal lives. In our new relationship, I valued his perspective, even on my professional decisions. Absolutely not, he replied firmly. This is business, Sarah. An important acquisition for Walker Properties. The fact that Jessica is involved is unfortunate timing, but irrelevant to the business decision. I smiled slightly, appreciating his response. Thank you. I'll keep you posted. Sarah, he added before I could hang up, would you like me to come with you to the viewing? Not to interfere, just as moral support. The offer touched me deeply, another small indicator of how far we'd come. I appreciate that, I said honestly, but I think this is something I need to handle myself. Rain check on dinner? Of course. Good luck with the property. After we disconnected, I turned back to the folder, studying the details of Riverside Residences with renewed focus. The property consisted of 3 connected buildings with 128 luxury units, a rooftop garden, and street-level retail space, perfectly aligned with our integrated living concept for the Arts District. With the right renovations, it could become the centerpiece of our community-focused development strategy. I spent the morning reviewing comparable properties and preparing a preliminary valuation with my financial team. By lunchtime, we had outlined an aggressive but fair offer and identified the necessary funding sources. I was feeling confident about our strategy when Rachel Chen arrived for our standing weekly lunch. You're looking particularly focused today, she observed as we settled at our usual table in the bistro near Parkview Tower. Riverside Residences just came on the market, I explained, filling her in on the details. Rachel whistled softly. Thomas Harrison must be in serious trouble to sell at that price. It's a perfect opportunity for you. Completes your Arts District holdings, doesn't it? I nodded, then hesitated before adding, there's a complication. Jessica Turner is representing a competing buyer. Rachel's eyebrows shot up. David's Jessica, the secretary? Apparently, she's reinvented herself as a commercial real estate agent, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. How very, convenient, Rachel remarked dryly. And how does David feel about this unexpected resurrection? He was surprised to hear she's back, but supportive of the acquisition. We're in a different place now. Rachel studied me carefully. And you? How do you feel about facing her? It was a fair question, one I'd been avoiding all morning. Jessica Turner represented a painful chapter in my marriage, the woman David had chosen over me before discovering who I really was. While we'd never directly addressed whether he'd ended things with her or she'd simply disappeared after my revelation, her presence now stirred complicated emotions. Professionally, I'm confident, I answered truthfully. Personally, it's uncomfortable but not devastating. 4 months ago, this would have felt like another confrontation with someone who undermined my life. Now it just feels like a business meeting with an awkward footnote. Growth, Rachel observed with a small smile. Remember when you first discovered their relationship? You were ready to walk away from 7 years of marriage. I was, I acknowledged. And I might have, if things hadn't unfolded as they did. But David's shown genuine commitment to changing our dynamic. This is just an unexpected test. Just be prepared, Rachel cautioned. People like Jessica don't simply disappear and reappear without purpose. If she's back in Westlake representing a major buyer specifically interested in a property adjacent to your holdings, that feels calculated. I considered this perspective, recognizing its merit. You think she's deliberately positioning herself against me? I think, Rachel said carefully, that you should approach this as both a business opportunity and a chance to close a chapter that never properly ended. Just don't underestimate the personal element, for her or for yourself. Rachel's warning stayed with me throughout lunch and into the early afternoon as I finalized our acquisition strategy. By 3 o'clock, I was pulling into the parking lot of Riverside Residences, purposefully early for my 4 o'clock appointment. I wanted time to walk the perimeter and observe the property without the filter of an agent's presentation. The complex was even more impressive in person than in the prospectus. 3 elegant buildings arranged around a central courtyard with mature trees and thoughtfully designed seating areas. The limestone facades and large windows gave the buildings a timeless quality that would integrate perfectly with our arts district aesthetic. From a business perspective, my determination to acquire the property only strengthened. At precisely 3:55, a sleek black BMW pulled into the reserved parking space near the leasing office. I watched from my position near the courtyard fountain as Jessica Turner emerged, looking polished and confident in a tailored suit that likely cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was checking her watch and scanning the parking lot, clearly expecting a client. She hadn't noticed me yet. For a moment, I simply observed her, this woman who had nearly become my replacement. She was conventionally beautiful, certainly, but what struck me most was her demeanor, the practiced poise that reminded me of myself in business settings. There was a competence in her movements that contradicted the dismissive way David had once described her as just my secretary. Perhaps we had both been underestimated. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the leasing office. Jessica saw me when I was about halfway across the parking lot. The flash of recognition, followed by obvious shock, flitted across her face before she composed herself into professional neutrality. "Ms. Walker," she greeted me as I approached, her voice steady despite the obvious tension. "I wasn't expecting you personally. My appointment is with a representative from Walker Properties." "I prefer to evaluate key acquisitions myself," I replied calmly, "particularly ones as strategically important as Riverside Residences." Jessica nodded, opening the leasing office door with a key from a lockbox. "Of course. Shall we begin the tour?" The next hour proceeded with surreal professionalism. Jessica led me through the property, highlighting its features and potential with the polished expertise of someone who clearly knew the commercial real estate market. I asked relevant questions about occupancy rates, maintenance reserves, and zoning allowances for our planned renovations. A casual observer would never have detected the complicated history between us. It wasn't until we reached the rooftop garden of the central building, with its panoramic views of the arts district, including several Walker Properties buildings visible in the near distance, that the careful facade cracked. "You've done well for yourself," Jessica remarked, her gaze fixed on the skyline rather than on me. "Walker Properties is the talk of the commercial real estate world. Quite the revelation for everyone who knew you as David's wife." There it was, the first acknowledgement of our shared history. "Yes," I agreed simply. "Though I've always been more than David's wife, whether people recognized it or not." Jessica turned to face me directly, her professional mask slipping, to reveal something more complex. Not quite hostility, but a searching intensity. "He never mentioned your business," she said. "Not once in all the time I worked with him. He talked about your foundation work, your dinner parties, your charity committees, but never that you were building a real estate empire right under his nose. He didn't know, I confirmed. David saw what he expected to see, a supportive wife with suitable feminine interests. The idea that I might be running a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate firm simply didn't fit his narrative. "And now?" she asked, a curious vulnerability entering her voice. "Now he's learning to see me clearly," I replied. "We're building something new, something based on mutual respect and recognition." Jessica absorbed this, turning back to the skyline. "I left because I thought it was over, that there was no way he'd stay after discovering you'd kept such a massive secret. I assumed the humiliation would be too much for his pride." The frank admission hung in the air between us. I could have responded defensively, could have reminded her that she'd been planning to leave with a married man, could have claimed some moral high ground. Instead, I chose honesty. "It nearly was," I acknowledged. "But revelations have a way of forcing people to confront deeper truths. David had to face his own blindness, the fact that he'd completely failed to see who I really was for 7 years. That's a powerful catalyst for change." "And you?" Jessica asked, meeting my eyes again. "How do you move past the fact that he was ready to leave you for me? That if you hadn't overheard our conversation and revealed your business identity, he would be with me now instead of seeing you clearly?" The question struck at the heart of the doubt I'd carried these past months, through all the careful rebuilding of trust and connection with David. Was his newfound respect truly for me, or was it merely awe at my unexpected success? Would he have ever valued me without the revelation of Walker Properties? "I don't know that we ever fully move past something like that," I answered truthfully. "But we can choose to build something new that acknowledges the broken foundation rather than pretending it never cracked. David and I are trying to create an authentic relationship now, with all our flaws and capabilities visible." Jessica studied me for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think he actually loves you. Even when he was planning to leave, there was something unresolved in how he spoke about you, as if he knew he was missing something important but couldn't identify what." The admission clearly cost her something to make. Before I could respond, she shifted back to her professional demeanor. "The seller is entertaining offers until Wednesday," she stated, her voice crisp once more. "Given the interest level, I would recommend submitting your best offer initially." "And your client?" I asked, matching her return to business. "Will they be submitting a competitive offer?" "National Capital Group is very interested in establishing a presence in this market," she confirmed. "This property aligns with their acquisition strategy." "I'm sure it does," I replied, recognizing the name of one of the largest commercial real estate investment firms in the country, particularly given its proximity to Walker Properties' Arts District holdings. Something like respect flickered in Jessica's eyes. "You see the strategic play." "I do," I acknowledged. "The question is whether National Capital's interest is purely about the property, or if there's a more personal element to their targeting of Riverside residences specifically." Jessica's expression remained neutral, but a slight tension in her posture confirmed my suspicion. "Business is often personal, Ms. Walker. You've demonstrated that quite effectively yourself." We completed the tour with restored professionalism, exchanging business cards and formal pleasantries at the Bindsubbia. Conclusion. As Jessica locked the leasing office, she paused, seemingly on the verge of saying something more personal, but then thought better of it. "I'll convey your interest to the seller," she said instead. "Good luck with your offer." I watched her drive away, her BMW disappearing around the corner before I allowed myself to process the layered complexity of our interaction. Meeting Jessica had been surprisingly cathartic, not because of any dramatic confrontation, but because of the strange humanity we'd glimpsed in each other. We were both women who had been underestimated, who had found ways to leverage that underestimation into advantage, who had become entangled in a relationship triangle not entirely of our own making. As I drove back to my office, I felt an unexpected clarity about both the property acquisition and my marriage. Riverside Residences would be a perfect addition to the Walker Properties portfolio, strengthening our Arts District strategy regardless of who else might be bidding. And my relationship with David, while still evolving, was built on something more substantial than his reaction to my business success. We were doing the hard work of truly seeing each other, messy, complicated, and authentic. By the time I reached Parkview Tower, I had already outlined our acquisition offer in my mind. Walker Properties would present an all-cash offer slightly above asking price, with the 7-day closing window the seller desired, plus an additional incentive. We would retain the current property management team and maintenance staff, ensuring continuity for existing residents. It was aggressive but fair, leveraging our financial strength while demonstrating our community-focused values. Emma was waiting when I returned, eager for my assessment. "It's perfect," I confirmed. "Get the team together. We're making an offer. First thing Monday morning." "And the competition?" she asked cautiously. "National Capital Group, represented by Jessica Turner," I replied, keeping my tone matter-of-fact. "They'll bid competitively, but we have the advantage of local presence and a comprehensive neighborhood development plan that adds value beyond the purchase price." Emma nodded, clearly relieved by my businesslike approach to Jessica's involvement. "Will you tell David about the meeting?" The question gave me pause. In our old marriage, I would have kept this encounter to myself, maintaining the careful separation between my personal and professional worlds. In our new relationship, such compartmentalization felt counterproductive. Yes, I decided. Honesty includes the uncomfortable parts. I spent the next 2 hours working with my financial team to structure our offer, ensuring we could liquidate the necessary assets without compromising other projects. By 7 o'clock, we had a solid plan in place, ready to formalize on Monday morning. I gathered my things to leave, mentally preparing for the conversation with David ahead. When I arrived home, I found David in the kitchen, music playing softly as he prepared a simple dinner, another example of the small but meaningful changes in our domestic life. Before my revelation, kitchen duties had been implicitly designated as wife work, regardless of our respective schedules or energy levels. Now, we shared these responsibilities more equitably. "How did the property viewing go?" he asked, looking up from the pasta sauce he was stirring. "The property is ideal," I replied, pouring myself a glass of wine. "Perfect location, good condition, below market value. We're preparing an offer for Monday morning." David nodded, his focus on my professional assessment rather than immediately asking about Jessica, another shift from our old dynamic where he might have prioritized the personal gossip over my business evaluation. "Competitive situation?" he asked, demonstrating his growing understanding of real estate acquisitions. "Very," I confirmed. National Capital Group is the primary competitor. They're entering the market aggressively, and Riverside Residences would give them a strategic foothold in the Arts District. I took a sip of wine, then added, "Jessica is indeed representing them. She conducted the viewing personally." David's hand stilled momentarily on the wooden spoon before resuming its stirring. "How was that?" "Surprisingly clarifying," I answered thoughtfully. "We maintained professional courtesy. The underlying tension was there, of course, but it wasn't the focus." He turned to face me fully, sauce forgotten. "Did she say anything about us?" The question held layers of meaning. Was he asking if Jessica had mentioned their past relationship? If she had inquired about our current marriage? If she had revealed why she'd left so abruptly? "She thought you wouldn't stay," I said directly. "After my revelation. She left because she assumed your pride couldn't handle it." David absorbed this, his expression turning inward. She wasn't wrong about who I was then, he acknowledged quietly. The man I was 4 months ago might well have walked away rather than face how completely I'd failed to see you. The simple admission, his recognition of his former limitations without defensiveness, demonstrated how far we'd come. What changed? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective on our transformation. David considered the question carefully, turning back to lower the heat under the sauce before answering. That first night, after you revealed everything, when Michael Donovan told me how brilliant you are, how respected in the business community, something shifted. Not because I was impressed by your success, though I was, he clarified quickly, but because I realized that if I could be so completely wrong about the person I'd lived with for 7 years, what else might I be missing? What other assumptions were blinding me? He moved to lean against the counter facing me, his expression earnest. It forced me to question everything I thought I knew, about you, about our marriage, about myself. And when I started really looking, really listening, I discovered that the woman I was prepared to leave was someone I'd invented, not the remarkable person who was actually sharing my life. The vulnerability in his confession moved me deeply. We'd spent months carefully rebuilding trust, but this felt like a breakthrough, a fundamental recognition of the core issue that had nearly destroyed us. And Jessica? I asked, needing to address the lingering question between us. Was a symptom, not the cause, he replied honestly. I was attracted to her because she reflected back the version of myself I wanted to see, the successful attorney, the man in charge. She admired me in exactly the way I thought I deserved to be admired. He shook his head slightly. The irony is that what I interpreted as your lack of appropriate admiration was actually your recognition of my limitations alongside my strengths, a much more generous perspective than I deserved. The pasta water boiled over suddenly, breaking the intensity of the moment. David turned quickly to adjust the heat, and I moved to set the table, both of us falling into the comfortable rhythm we'd developed these past months. As we worked together, in companionable silence, I felt another piece of our marriage's new foundation lock into place. Over dinner, we discussed the Riverside Residence's acquisition in detail, David asking insightful questions about financing structures and development timelines, offering thoughtful perspectives on potential community impact. It was exactly the kind of equal partnership conversation I'd always wanted but never experienced in our former marriage. As we cleared the dishes together afterward, David paused, dish towel in hand. For what it's worth, he said carefully, I hope you get the property, not because it's competing with Jessica or National Capital, but because I've seen your vision for the Arts District. What you're creating there, the integration of living spaces, creative workplaces, and community gathering spots, it's transformative. Riverside Residences belongs in that vision. His genuine enthusiasm for my professional work, not performative, support, but real understanding of my business objectives, touched me deeply. Thank you, I said simply. Later that evening, as we prepared for bed, I received an email notification on my phone. The subject line made me pause. Riverside Residences, confidential information. The sender was Jessica Turner. David noticed my sudden focus on the phone. Everything okay? I hesitated only briefly before answering truthfully. An email. From Jessica, about the property. His eyebrows rose slightly. That seems unusual. For a competing agent to contact you directly. Very, I agreed, opening the message while sitting on the edge of our bed. I opened Jessica's email, my heart beating faster as I quickly scanned its contents. Ms. Walker, while representing competing interests, I feel obligated to share that National Capital Group's interest in Riverside Residences is not purely business. Their regional director, Thomas Reed, specifically targeted this property after learning of its proximity to your holdings. I've attached a copy of their internal acquisition memo, which mentions using this purchase as leverage against Walker Properties' future expansion. My professional ethics prevent me from continuing this representation. I've informed NCG that I'm withdrawing as their agent effective immediately. Regards, Jessica Turner. Attached was a document clearly marked as internal and confidential, outlining NCG's strategy to acquire properties surrounding Walker Properties developments, creating a strategic containment of our Arts District vision. Sarah? David's concerned voice broke through my concentration. What is it? I handed him my phone wordlessly, watching as he read the email and attachment, his expression darkening. This is corporate sabotage, he said, legal mind immediately, identifying the implications. They're deliberately targeting your development plan. The question is why, I replied, mind racing through possibilities. And why would Jessica warn me? David looked thoughtful. Maybe facing you today made her reassess her priorities, or perhaps she recognizes predatory tactics from having been on the receiving end herself. Whatever Jessica's motivation, her warning gave us valuable intelligence. I immediately called Emma, despite the late hour, asking her to convene our legal team first thing Sunday morning. By the time I hung up, a strategy was already forming in my mind. What are you thinking? David asked, recognizing my focused expression. I'm thinking we don't just bid on riverside residences, I replied. We approach Harrison about acquiring his entire Westlake portfolio. Sunday morning found us at the Walker Properties conference room, surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors. The plan that emerged was bold but feasible, offering Thomas Harrison a comprehensive purchase of his 6 Westlake properties, structured as a partnership that would give him liquidity while preserving his legacy through joint development. It's risky, my CFO cautioned. We'd be extending beyond our current capital reserves. Sometimes the biggest risks yield the greatest rewards, I replied, thinking of all the times I'd been underestimated and how that had become my greatest advantage. Monday morning, I personally called Thomas Harrison. By Wednesday, we'd signed preliminary agreements. By Friday, National Capital Group had withdrawn from the market entirely, their containment strategy thwarted before it began. The evening of the closing, David surprised me with champagne on our rooftop terrace, overlooking the city we both loved. To the woman who transforms everything she touches, he toasted, genuine admiration in his eyes. As we clinked glasses, my phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. Congratulations on the Harrison portfolio acquisition. Impressive counter strategy. I've accepted a position with Meridian Partners in Chicago. Some fresh starts require new cities. Wishing you both well. I showed the message to David, who nodded thoughtfully. Closure, he said simply. For all of us, I agreed. Looking out over the skyline, I could see the riverside residences illuminated in the distance, now part of the Walker Properties vision for a revitalized arts district. In the soft evening light, I could also see my husband clearly. Not the man who had once dismissed me, but the partner who had learned to truly see me. What's next? David asked, his arm slipping around my waist as we gazed at the city together. Expansion, I replied, leaning into him. The Coleman building just came on the market, perfect for that mixed-use concept we discussed. He smiled at my use of we, a small but significant acknowledgement of our new partnership. Tell me more, he said, genuinely interested in my vision. As I outlined the possibilities, I reflected on how completely our dynamics had transformed. My revelation had forced David to see me clearly, but it had also allowed me to step fully into my power. No more compartmentalization, no more diminishing myself to accommodate his ego. The journey from just a housewife to acknowledged business leader had been complex and sometimes painful. The parallel journey from unequal marriage to authentic partnership had required courage and commitment from both of us. Not every relationship could survive such a fundamental recalibration, but ours had emerged stronger, built on truth rather than comfortable misconceptions. The city lights twinkled below us, including buildings I owned and had transformed. But the most important transformation had been internal. The integration of my personal and professional identities into one authentic whole. You know what I love most about your development vision? David asked, interrupting my thoughts. What's that? You never just see buildings as they are, he said thoughtfully. You see what they could become with the right investment and care. That applies to people too, I replied, meeting his gaze meaningfully. He nodded, understanding the deeper truth in my words. Lucky for me. As the night deepened around us, I felt a profound sense of peace. The day my husband had dismissed me as just his wife had become the catalyst for revealing my true self. Not just to him, but to the world. And most importantly, to myself. I was Sarah Walker Mitchell, real estate developer, visionary partner, fully seen, finally whole, completely free. The landlord revelation that had started as a moment of ironic justice had evolved into something far more valuable, a life lived, authentically, on my own terms. In the end, owning buildings wasn't nearly as empowering as owning my truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.